So as you can tell, there's a little bit of a break in the recording here. I was having some trouble uploading to YouTube because of the length of the video that I tried to upload on Monday. So if you tried to access that early, YouTube took it down because it was more than 15 minutes long. So this is me re-recording the last bit of section 8.2 here. So in the previous slide, we were talking about how the levels of profit can change based on where the marginal revenue and marginal cost curves meet. So then the next natural question is to figure out whether the firm should shut down and whether or not making a negative profit is enough for a firm to shut down. So in the short run, the firm still has to pay its fixed costs. If the firm shuts down, its profits are given by this equation here. So we have the profit, as always, is just the total revenue minus the total costs. And we can separate out the total costs into fixed costs and variable costs. The thing to note is that the firm always has to pay its fixed costs, but it does not always have to pay its variable costs. So if it shuts down, it gets zero revenue, zero total revenue, but also zero variable costs. This factors into their decision to shut down. The fixed costs, like we talked about last chapter, they have no control over. Once you buy a factory in the short run, it's very difficult to sell off that factory. But in the short run, it's easy to lay off workers if you have to shut down. However, if the firm keeps operating, you have this equation. Again, the profit is the same. It's the total revenue minus the total costs. But this time, the variable costs still factor into the decision. And you can find the difference between the two, the difference between the decision to keep operating versus the decision to shut down as the total revenue minus the variable costs. Again, that's just because in the shutdown case above, you don't have any variable costs. So the only difference between the two is the difference between the amount of revenue that it receives when it doesn't shut down and the additional variable costs that it incurs by not shutting down. In general, firms should remain open and operating at a loss in the short run as long as revenue can cover variable costs, even if the profit is negative. And we'll show you a graph here demonstrating this. So as usual, we have our marginal costs, our average variable costs, our average total costs. The average total costs is just the sum of the variable costs and the fixed costs. And we have our flat demand curve for the individual firm, where the price equals the marginal revenue. We have our nice equilibrium point, where marginal cost equals marginal revenue right here. And then we have this point where the quantity meets the average total cost, and this point where the quantity meets the average variable cost. This box here is the total revenue box. You can tell it's a total revenue box because it ends up just being the equilibrium price times the equilibrium quantity. As always, total revenue is always equal to price times quantity. And then we have this additional box, and that's our total cost. This whole thing is our total cost. But it's only this upper portion, this pink portion here, that is the loss. That's the difference, like we saw a couple slides ago, between where marginal revenue equals marginal cost and where the average total cost curve meets. In general, the firm wants to continue operating as long as the total revenue is more than the variable cost, or as long as the price is greater than or equal to the average variable cost. In this case, we can see that the price is greater than the equivalent average variable cost, so we know that we'll keep operating. However, on the opposite end, if you just flip those signs around, they'll shut down if the total revenue is less than the variable cost or if the price is less than the average variable cost. So if this equilibrium price were to shift down somewhere below here to the below the average variable cost, then we would know that the firm would want to shut down. But the key thing to remember is that the firm is going to keep operating as long as it covers its variable costs. As long as it can keep paying their employees, the firm's going to keep going. Okay. In a separate video, I'll cover this figure it out question asking about uh, the shutdown quantity and the shutdown price. There is an equivalent pop-up question that you guys should be aware of that is looks very similar. Um, so I'll post that video, give this one a try, and then we'll move on to section 8.3.